Hello YouTube. I'm going to tell you about one of the most sinister cases that goes back to 1953. In itself, a very unusual year in the history of the world and ufology as well. I should say Soviet ufology, but that would be wrong because other cases took place in that year. When I talk to you about this case and the object I'll describe, I want you also to remember that, as I've stated in the Russia's USO secrets and my other presentations, there have been reports taken by the Soviet Navy intelligence and counterintelligence services, and exactly the same object, identical object, had been observed and recorded in 1979 in a faraway area of the Pacific Ocean by the Soviet Navy counterintelligence service. But now I want to tell you about what happened in 1953 and add a few things after that. This was in one of the most remote areas of the Soviet Union, in the Taiga region. This was in June of 1953, and the area was the Krasnoyarsk region by the Ishimba River in the Oymolon area, not very far away from the site of the Tunguska explosion. The eyewitness was Veniamin Dodin, and I'll tell you more about him. He was a remarkable person. He passed away in 2014, but he left behind a number of writings and stories that you should know about. He spent 14 years in the Soviet concentration camps, and the period where the incident took place, he was in exile at the time, exile in Siberia. On a clear night in June, while he was walking, Dodin heard a high-pitched noise, as if it came from the inside of his head. Then he saw the object that emitted that noise. It was a long, cylinder-like craft. It seemingly was gleaming, radiating light, as it hovered over the clouds at a distance of about 2 miles upwards. Dodin could clearly see its rotating drum-shaped body. The fuselage was girded with something that resembled a moving staircase with many steps. Completely opened and half-turned toward Dodin was the butt end of the cylinder ellipsoid body. Dodin immediately assumed that the object was a blimp, a dirigible, but the absence of cabins or cockpit confused the scientist. The object, slowly rotating, moved in Dodin's direction. The design of the blimp appeared to be technologically incorrect to Veniamin Dodin. He had no doubts that the object was a dirigible or a blimp. What worried the exiled scientist was the possible payload it was carrying. You see, in that area, at the time, was a top secret Soviet research center. I believe the name that it had was Box 26, just a designation. We don't know what the name is. What was being developed were new types of super powerful weapons. And Dodin, of course, assumed that he had entered by mistake the testing area. Then he noticed that the rear end, or the butt end, was actually a flat drum-shaped body. It separated itself from the cylinder and rapidly ascended. The noise that Dodin felt in his ears receded, but became even less pleasant. It was like a painful squeak that he heard. Several more flat drums exited the dirigible and flew upwards. Then the open end of the mysterious object closed and the cylinder flew away. Dodin's earache was gone too, and the flat drums disappeared as well. The blimp returned the following night. Dodin, scientist, knew that no man-made object could travel at such velocities as to instantly disappear from view. Was the object in the sky some advanced aircraft? Dodin was worried that those who ran that Sinister Box 26 would come to the area too. Even exiles like him and inmates of the local concentration camps heard horrible stories about the projects of that secret research center. Yet Dodin decided to investigate. He was a brave person. He took photographs of the object with his camera. If the Soviet authorities would catch him, then he knew that his destiny was determined. An exile taking photographs in the forbidden Oimelon area would be sent back to the Gulag camps, or much worse. But Dodin, again a brave person, observed the UFOs from that object for about 40 hours. The objects continued to pour out those smaller flat drums. In turn, the drums vanished almost instantly. Dodin estimated that each drum was about 80 feet in diameter. The mother ship dirigible was approximately 650 feet in diameter. Each mother ship threw out 8 perfectly and smoothly polished flat drums. Dodin used the Zeiss theodolite to observe the strange objects because he had no other tools. The eyepiece he looked through enabled him to make out slight radiance emanating from the panels of the drums. The mothership did not emit any luminescence or radiance. Dodin tried in vain to reach the side of the nearest cylinder. He failed every time. Moreover, he became ill whenever he approached the site. Prior to the incident, Dodin was never ill or felt sick in the taiga. Taiga is the dense forest regions of Siberia. Now, he experienced sharp pains in his joints. The same sharp, painful noises as on the first day that he observed the cylinder, they came back. It was an unbearable pain, he recollected, and he recalled, and it forced Dodin to turn back. As soon as he came home, Dodin fell asleep for a long time. The KGB of the period arrived in the area in early July, accompanied by Soviet military pilots. The KGB noticed Dodin's camera and confiscated it and the film. He was questioned extensively after they took away his camera. Dodin was certain that he photographed some top secret Soviet project. The scientists found out later that he was wrong. The objects Dodin observed troubled Soviet military commanders in the area too, because they tried to use radars, but discovered that something was jamming their radar station. The radiation at super high frequencies emanating from the mothership was so great that the KGB and the pilots decided to evacuate the area. Before fleeing the site, however, they ordered Dodin to continue his observations. According to Mark Shevelov, who headed the Arctic Aviation Agency, the Soviet leaders quickly learned about these UFOs, but decided to refrain from challenging the unknown. Stalin died not that long ago, and the situation in the USSR was not very stable. However, the Soviets blinked, and on August 7, 1953, their airplanes attacked the UFOs over Ishimba. As a result of the attack, 2 interceptor aircraft vanished, along with 4 pilots. They exploded air-to-air missiles, and they were inexplicably turned away from their UFO targets. They burned a giant chunk of the taiga. All radar equipment and in the 120-mile radius of the site broke down. Dodin would never forget that evening of the doomed attack. His radio made a piercing noise and shut down. Then a horrible noise hit Dodin inside his ears and he fainted. He regained conscience at night. When he climbed outside his hut, Dodin discovered a world painted in greenish hues. The luminescence in the area remained greenish for over a month. It faded slowly like radiation after a nuclear explosion. So this was one of the most sinister cases of 1953, and I need to add something about Veniamin Zalmanovich Dodin. He was born in 1943 in Moscow. When he was 5 years old, the KGB arrested his parents. His father, Zalman Dorin, was a top Soviet scientist in specialist in metallurgy and mathematician. And his mother, a surgeon, military surgeon, was arrested too. In 1932, they arrested his grandmother. And they tortured her in the local KGB office. Then, a year and a half later, his brother was arrested too. I want you to understand the background of the Soviet Union, especially the Stalinist times when a lot of the incidents were taking place and what people have gone through. That's important. So you know that people like Dorin, of course, can be trusted, but moreover than that, you need to know the background of some of the cases that had taken place and the situation in the Soviet Union. And of course, 1953 was a very, very unstable situation after the death of Stalin. One of the reports, by the way, I had from the former Soviet Union described a meeting in 1953 between the intelligence agencies of the USSR, United States, United Kingdom, and France about the issue of the extraterrestrials and UFOs. But I want to get back to Dorin, because his biography deserves to be heard, and he was a very interesting person. He spent many years in the concentration camps. I would say 14 years definitely, in the Volga region, in the Arctic, in the Chukotka, in the Amur region, in the Caucasus Mountains. The only time when he had it easier was the time when he was exiled to the Ishimba region in the Angar Tunguska area. And in his life, Dorin did everything to help other prisoners, concentration camp prisoners, mostly foreigners, because they were most helpless in the Soviet concentration camps. And he paid for that too, because the Soviets would increase his sentences because of that. In the 1918, actually, his parents created a society called Rescue, and he participated in this society to the extent possible. He was able actually to study and to graduate from several colleges and institutions, and in the later years, and he worked as a head of a scientific research institute in the Arctic regions, and he still helped foreigners to the extent possible. He even created an organization, helped create an organization in Tokyo, which was called the Independent Association of Volunteers to help the victims of repression and genocide. So this was a very important person, and he also was a knowledgeable one, as I explained, because he was one of the experts of the commission for the construction in the regions of the extreme cold climate. And this was a joint USSR-USA commission too, and he helped find people such as the prisoners of war who had disappeared without trace. He was active in the Geographical Society of Russia, and until 1991 he helped organize medical and other help for the former prisoners of the Soviet concentration camps. From the 1960s on, Veniamin Dorin was contacted by the people he served, the Swedish people and the Polish inmates of the concentration camps, people from Switzerland, Germans, and in 1990 by the Japanese, because he especially was able to help the Japanese people in the Soviet concentration camps. Even the president of the Sony Corporation, whose brother at one time was in the Soviet concentration camps, one of the inmates. He was well known, but also we need to remember that his mother was a field surgeon who participated in many wars, and she was also arrested by the Soviets and spent time in the concentration camp. Years later, she was able to visit Japan and to visit the grave of her ancestor, who was himself from Holland and who was active in helping Japanese victims of a disease, many in the 19th century, and his grave is itself in Japan. So this is a very interesting story, and Dorian was Jewish, and his other family came from the old German, Dutch roots. He was an active person, he was a knowledgeable person, and because of him we know what happened in that case in 1953. Since 1991 he resided in Israel, and he wrote a number of interesting books, published a lot, and he was active until his death in 2014, when he was 90 years old. So I wanted to tell you this story, and I wanted to add that a lot more had happened in the taiga regions, and keep an eye on that territory to the extent possible, because there have been so many cases in the Russian north, in the Arctic areas, as I reported, in Siberia, in the Far East. My father had served in the Soviet army, and I would say about 3 years after Dodian's experiences, my dad was in the areas of the Far East, some of the areas to the north, and he had told me about the situation in the taiga. Few people in the West or elsewhere can even imagine what had been taking place there. It was at the time of the release of the concentration camp prisoners, to the extent allowed by Khrushchev. And my dad told me stories about cannibals, about the taiga people who lived there and nobody knew about them, those who would hide from the Soviet government, villages of those who had disappeared, many other stories. And I will tell you more cases about UFOs in the far remote areas of the Soviet Union. Thank you.